Great colleague from the state of Washington, good friend and chairman of our Western Caucus. I appreciate the time and the effort to have this time of education here tonight on the House floor, and for those that would watch and want to actually learn what goes on. So where do we start on the Endangered Species Act? Passed in 1973, signed by Republican President Richard Nixon. Now, if you were to listen to the rhetoric, anytime Republicans want to talk about reforming Endangered Species Act or doing things that make sense, I think, out in the woods, or with water storage, with mining the critical minerals we're going to need for a lot of these idealistic views we're going to have of more and more use of electricity, you'd think that we were going to be the plunderers of the land. Completely not the case. The things that are going on right now in the time of drought we have in the West, in my home state of California, and the ongoing problems we have with non-managed timberlands, U.S. forest lands, and the resulting effect that has on private lands with the bad neighbors the U.S. lands are typically to them. If we're in a time of drought, we need to even up our game more so on forestry, forest management, thinning, and using these materials for the good of people. We had a toilet paper shortage months ago, as ridiculous as that sounds in a first world country like the United States, and yet we're burning millions of acres every year. You can trace a lot of this back to the misuse, the abuse of the Endangered Species Act to stop and block the type of work we need to be doing. You know, we've had hundreds of thousands of acres of fire, like over there on the western coast, north coast of California. They tried to put in a project after a 400,000 acre burn to do a minimal amount, 7,000 acres of cleanup, of restoration, of removing some of the dead trees and brush and other things that were left behind along roadways and somewhere around communities, etc. Environmental lawsuits come in and stop them from doing 7,000 out of 4, less than 2% out of the fire. So what is the solution on this? Just watch these ghost trees stay there, watch the brush grow up around all this and become the next tinderbox for the next fire in 5 or 7 years? That seems to be the solution by those on the far left that use the Endangered Species Act as a weapon to stop progress for people, as well as nature, as well as the environment. California in the throes of drought right now, big time. Our reservoirs are way down from just 2 years ago where they're all practically full. And 2 years before that, topped off too. You may recall Lake Oroville. The Oroville Dam had the spillway break apart in the early part of 2017 because the lake was actually flowing over the top of the emergency spillway. The dam is in fine shape. The spillway's been rebuilt. And we've stored a lot of water between then and now. So what has gone on? So much water has been released out to the Pacific Ocean and not used for people use, for agricultural use, or even smart environmental use. The usage of the Endangered Species Act as a weapon has devastated so much of agriculture in California, which maybe people don't realize that 90% of certain types of crops, the vegetable crops that the United States people use, come from California. Most of the almonds that you would use come from California. Where's this going to come from if California's out of business because of the misuse and abuse of the Endangered Species Act, because someone might decide the coho salmon up in the Klamath Basin is more valuable than the suckerfish in the Klamath Lake, or the waterfowl that gets forgotten about in the refuge there in the basin right around there. Last year we had a devastating kill on ducks and other wildlife in that Klamath Basin area because they couldn't get water through the agricultural system to where the refuge are for the ducks. So which species is it we're going to pick? You know, the water in the Klamath Project actually is assigned to agricultural use. The Klamath Project added additional water storage space to the existing Klamath Lake. Oregon courts have already ruled a couple times that additional water belongs to agriculture. It's not for something for the Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Interior to use in order to make their equations work out on the failed application to salmon in order to, in their idea, flush a virus out of the Klamath River. There's other evidence out there saying this is actually the opposite what you should do, is that the virus, the C. Shasta virus, is actually propagated by these additional flows. It's done year after year after year, and the virus keeps returning. Maybe you need to let that stuff dry out. And also the suckerfish that they're trying to protect in the lake, of bottom-feeding fish. Too much water in the lake, studies show by the NAS, National Academy of Sciences, that too much water in that lake makes them more vulnerable to predators and doesn't help the suckerfish, which is good at living in a shallow amount of water. So they're going opposite directions. Agriculture is devastated in the Klamath Basin. You're probably not going to see nearly the potatoes that I think In-N-Out Burger uses, horseradish, mint, other products, as well as a lot of hay crops. They're not going to happen this year, except for whatever water they can get from wells up there. Not going to happen. So when you see these things not on your store shelf anymore, you'll know that there's something going on. Or when you see them highly overpriced because we have to get them from some foreign country, you're going to see the root cause is because the California water supply has been frittered away for other things besides useful purposes. And this isn't in defiance of the ESA or helping species, but the right science isn't being used. When you have one term paper written being used as gospel on the Klamath River as setting policy versus a lot of other evidence, they want to remove the hydroelectric dams on the Klamath River. Now, when we're talking about drought in California, when we already have lakes and the reservoirs that are low, we have Lake Oroville is going to be at dead pool probably about mid-August. Now, what's the temperature in California in mid-August? Not quite like my colleague in Arizona I was speaking with, but it's hot, okay? And so when we have this water supply run out, unable to produce the hydroelectric power that we normally could because we could store it, then we're going to have more power shortages, not just because of power shutoffs, because when the wind blows in California now, we have to shut off the power because trees and things might blow branches into the power lines and cause another devastating fire like what is known as the Camp Fire that devastated the town of Paradise, also in my district. Where's the common sense with this? Where's the common sense of applying if we have drought conditions, or as like the left likes to talk about every other speech in this chamber, climate change, the religion of climate change. Okay, well, if the blankety-blank climate is changing, why aren't we storing more water since we as people are smart enough to know we need a water supply? Why aren't we doing more to cause electricity to be generated at that water storage site? Why aren't we doing more to trim and manage our forests that are overcrowded? Way too many trees per acre when they've been unmanaged that way for 100 years. Instead, we go on, and somebody comes up with a lawsuit to prevent us from managing forests that way, prevent us from storing additional water. Not to mention, when we talk about turning everything, all cars have to become electric by the year 2035. I know a lot of people that aren't interested in buying electric cars. What happened to the choice people have of vehicles the size and the style they seek to have? Yet we're hell-bent on electrifying everything. In the Bay Area, they want to ban gas stoves and gas appliances in people's homes because of some idealistic view of the environment and somehow tying that back to the misuse of Endangered Species Act. All this ties together. Endangered Species Act has been a great tool to shut down the things we need to do, whether it's an expansion of a highway, water storage. Shasta Dam right now in Redding, also in my district, could be raised 18 feet and add right away 640,000 acre feet of water on those full years. 640,000 acre feet would be enough for 1.2 million homes, or 200,000 acres of crops, of those crops that people watching this right now like to have for their fresh fruits, for their salads, for their vegetables, whatever it would be. And this is all going to be gone. Do you like imported oil? Do you love the oil shortages back in the 70s? Do you like this $4, $5, $6 gas and diesel we're having right now? Then you're going to love imported food. And the Endangered Species Act has been used as a weapon to stop people from farming, from timbering, from mining basic things that we need in order to have our electronics, to have copper for our wiring, any of those things. It's been such a weapon since 1973 when it was passed with good intentions. And I still think we need to have it. You know, it saved the bald eagle. It saved a lot of things. But also, its record overall, looking at savings of endangered species, is a pretty low number. Why? Is because he put ridiculous regulations in, ridiculous biological opinions that don't even connect the dots of how this is going to help a salmon in the Klamath River or farther up in Washington where they want to rip some of those dams out too and take away that hydroelectric power. Where are we going to get this stored water? Where are we going to get the hydroelectric power? You want to completely rely on what is a narrow part of the grid of solar power or wind power? You can't even rely on those. Not for a major part of the grid. We need to have 24/7 electricity you can count on with either biomass wood products stacked on the deck, the waste wood that should come from the forestry that we should be doing but aren't doing nearly fast enough, or natural gas plants. We have so much gas in this country now because of hydraulic fracturing, but that's vilified too, okay? Pipelines, bringing energy where it's needed, that's vilified too because they use an endangered species somewhere as a tool to stop this development. So, Americans, enjoy these high prices you're getting right now. Enjoy these shortages of electricity, of fuel, the higher cost of food, shortage of certain food items, because the usage of Endangered Species Act, the usage of other environmental laws, that's been abused, that's been completely taken out of context from the original intent why Congress passed back in '73 or layered upon since in recent years. We have to reform this process. It's not because Republicans want to plunder the planet. That is so tiresome. Anytime we talk about forest management, oh, you're going to clear cut everything. I'm from Northern California, so from here to Oregon or somewhere else. That's not it at all. Talk to any smart timber operation. They have 80, 100-year plans for the private lands that they manage. And if you could fly over and look at how these timber lands are managed, you can tell there's generally a checkerboard of private land versus federal land. You can see the different squares as they're managed either before a fire, ongoing, or after a fire. Just fly over 3 years after a fire and see who's actually been out there cleaning up their lands and trying to restore things versus that unmanaged federal land, which is still the big mess it was right after the fire. And you'll see the way the government is doing it, the way the left is foisting these ridiculous rules and laws upon us and not allowing us to do reasonable reform to bring just a little bit of balance back into what was passed 50 years ago, into what we have to deal with. So, at this time, when we're watching things go way off kilter here under this administration, I just remind those watching, look at the root cause. It all ties together. Endangered Species Act, other environmental laws, other lawsuits when you can't even turn around to do a simple thing without somebody coming after you, suing you over it. Even look around your own home, trying to build a deck on your home. Someone's going to try and environmentally slow you down on that these days. Build a pond. Farmers are getting fined for building a pond on their land in the western states in order to retain a little more water for their cattle. So when you see the high prices of these things all happening, look at the root cause. Enjoy these high prices of fuel and electricity and the shortages there, and know it isn't because of our policies here, but the policies of the misuse and abuse of endangered species laws, of environmental laws, and all the lawsuits that go along with them. I thank my colleague, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.